Hello, hello. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for being here bright and early on Monday morning for the second week of MDLAB 2017. I'm sorry about the delay. So many technical things to iron out, but thank you very much. So do I just start? Okay.
Here we go. صباح الخير، سوري تأخرنا عليكم، كان في شوية technical difficulties. حابة اليوم رحب ب Dr. Jayne Cubbage. Dr. Jayne is assistant professor at Bowie State University in the Department of Communication. She worked as a journalist with focus on media literacy in higher education. She has an edited volume coming up in 2018 on the topic of media literacy and higher education. I'm going to leave the floor to Jayne to talk more about herself and her lecture today about women shaping women, one image at a time from a media literacy perspective. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Luna. Once again, good morning. Is this too loud? Or is it? Okay. So good morning to everyone. Again, as mentioned, I'm Jayne Cubbage, and I've been speaking and talking and interacting with many of you over the course of the past week. So of course I feel like I'm in a group of warm and friendly faces. As mentioned, I work and teach at Bowie State University in Maryland in the United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. But before I get underway or get started, I wanted to basically say a few words of thank yous to the people at MDLAB, Dr. Jad Melki for offering the gracious extension to speak with you today, also to Lubna for all of her tireless work and patience with all of us, also to the sponsors of MDLAB, and also for Bowie State University for making this wonderful opportunity possible for me, and also to the entire staff of MDLAB, the digital squad, the people in the translation booth, everyone who is affiliated with making such a great and wonderful program available to all of us. Just a wonderful word of thank you. I have to catch myself because I do speak pretty fast, so I'm going to consciously slow down so that I'm getting like a thumbs up from the people upstairs to be slower and more deliberate in my speaking. It's a habit. Even my students tell me that I'm a very fast speaker. So I like to think that I speak fast because I think fast. It's kind of the way my brain works. So I apologize, and I will deliberately slow myself down when I'm speaking so that everyone may be able to clearly understand. Again, thank you to all of you, the participants, all the staff, working so hard and making us all feel so welcome and being so organized. It's very, very great to be here. And to all of my fellow MDLAB 2017 participants, it has been a pleasure meeting and working with all of you, fellowshipping, going out on the various events and learning and experiencing this great city of Beirut and this fabulous nation of Lebanon. So again, thank you to everyone. Just thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Let's see, before I begin, I also wanted to just make a quick comment about how I feel as an instructor, like this is a bit of poetic justice, working on all of the assignments. I am the professor who basically says to my students, no excuses, get your work in. I don't care if the dog or the cat ate your homework. I just need you to get your work in. And now I kind of understand the pain that they're going through when I've hardly sent them, made them do their assignments, and not gave a concern about their idiosyncrasies or various reasons why they may not be able to meet their assignments. So a bit of poetic justice. I felt like maybe I should be nicer to my students. I'll consider that going forward. Thank you. So I wanted to begin the presentation by starting off with a word of inspiration from Josephine Baker, the great entertainer from the 1920s. She basically said, "You are on the eve of a complete victory. You can't go wrong. The world is behind you." So think of that for just a moment. Just ponder, if you will. That's right, I saw some people taking the slides. So, by way of introduction of the presentation that I'm going to present to you today, I'll give an introduction of the topic, and then we'll talk about the various intersections. This presentation will intersect with many of the previous presentations that we have received over the past week, and so you will hear some common topics discussed as well, so it's not necessarily to overlap what's being said, but to reinforce some of the messages and themes that we have discussed and addressed over the course of the week. There will be 2 interactive features where I will open the floor for questions. We'll talk about some of the cultural imperatives of a field called organizational communication. And then we will talk about 2 terms, one called ascribe versus avow. And then we'll talk about the differences, and I will ask you to think about the ways in which you have been ascribed to and ways in which you avow define yourself. We'll get more into that a little later. The primary focus of today's presentation will discuss and treat the concept of Black women in the United States and stereotypes that occur in the media. We'll also, of course, infuse the topic of media literacy into this discussion. And then I will give you a little bit of background and information about my story as a journalist, media literacy scholar, and how I seek to change the narrative and rewrite existing stereotypes that exist in the media, and how I may inspire other people to do the same through their own work and understanding of what we know as media literacy. And then we will have another interactive feature, and these are not necessarily involved interactive features, but more or less opening the floor up for questions and asking you to engage in the dialogue and think about some of the concepts and terms that we're talking about. I'll ask you to write down a couple of your ideas and thoughts and then share them with the rest of the audience. Then we will do a conclusion and then questions and answers, so pretty quickly. I have about an hour to speak, so if it feels like I'm rushing or we don't have time to get to every one of you or to answer everyone's questions, then please feel free to contact me later. I will be available after I have business cards, and you may contact me later. Of course, I'm around with every one of you, so please feel free to come and talk to me about any components that I have been discussing with you today. So again, I've mentioned we would talk about some of the intersections of this presentation as well as some of the previous presentations that we have discussed and experienced over the past week. And so some of the intersections will be framing, critical race theory, feminism theory. Of course, we will talk about, again, media literacy, because that's what we've all come here to do, discuss the wonderful topic. We will talk a bit about data, just not necessarily extensively, but the idea of creating data, and then, of course, propaganda, and then other topics. Now, I won't necessarily delve deeply into these topics, but you will find, as we're speaking, that these topics will actually intersect with some of the topics that are embedded in this presentation. So I want to talk give a word about the concept of privilege. I hear that word kind of thrown or discussed a lot, a great deal, the concept of privilege. People say, I have a privilege, and academically it is a construct of the concept or the theory called critical race theory. And privilege kind of comes from the term of being able to be given benefits in a society that you do not earn. Typically, the concept under the construct of critical race theory talks about privilege as unearned privileges in a construct of race or ethnicity. Also, when you hear the term kind of microaggression or triggers, things that people understand or sort of need as sort of a warning about offensive topics, those are the kinds of things that we talk about. But I want to switch the concept of privilege at this point and talk about how privilege can be turned around and used to benefit the greater group of people or greater humanity. As I mentioned, it is a privilege to be here speaking with you today. And I think that privileges can be turned around and made into benefits or rights for other people in general. And so, for instance, it is a privilege to be here, all of us participating in MDLAB 2017, and ultimately we want to extend that privilege to other people so that they may enjoy this great conference. But a question, when you think about this in a rhetorical sense, sort of, I won't ask you to answer it directly, but just think about it, reflect about it for a moment or two, and think about the ways in which you find yourself privileged and the ways in which you can or may extend that privilege to other people so that your privileges can become a right for other people. Again, the right to understand and know more about, learn more about the concept of media literacy. A privilege. We want to ensure that it becomes a right for other people. It's just something to kind of reflect on as we get underway. Now, as mentioned before, I teach organizational communication to graduate students at Bowie State University in Maryland. And I teach as part of a program, a course on intercultural communication. Intercultural communication meaning the mixture of cultures. And one of the core concepts or core imperatives of the concept of intercultural communication is the discussion of the ways in which we are different, yet the same. So as we know, we all have our differences between each other. And then when you think about it, when you look at things from a deeper level, in reality, we have some of the same experiences, some of the same commonalities. And that is a way in which you can bridge the gap between cultures. We tend to focus on our differences when in reality, the imperative of intercultural communication suggests that we focus upon the ways in which we are the same. And intercultural communication, they offer 4 key premises under which we can all sort of use as a rallying point. We all love children, find them to be near and dear to our hearts. We feel in most cultures that children are sort of a gift and that they are a sign that tomorrow is worth living. Today and tomorrow are worth living, and so we draw near to children. We also rally around or find commonality through food and cuisine. The other day we made a stop at KFC, and so we were all sitting at KFC, and I recall thinking, yes, KFC is very, very good in the United States, very favored, and then here you have it here. Now I also have found myself enjoying the various cuisine that I'm experiencing here in Lebanon. So it's, again, something that's common. Everyone likes a good meal and good food. It's always something that you can sort of draw strength from. And then, of course, there's music. We were taking a trip yesterday on the bus, and we were listening to various music. And so I was listening. I didn't understand the words, but I could understand and resonate and sort of appreciate that the songs have meaning to the people who are listening to them, and that they are common across various countries, but that everyone likes those songs. And so I was having a wonderful experience listening to all of you sing and express yourself through music and joy, and related to that very well. And then, of course, we rally around sporting events or sports. Everyone likes a winner. Everyone likes to root for their favorite team. They like a champion. And that's resonant. In the United States, we like football, which is American football. Now we're growing more into liking the fit sport of soccer, which you call football, in the rest of the world. And then we have a number of sporting teams at universities and colleges. In the early years of education and secondary education, there are always sporting teams and events to sort of rally around. So sports is something, again, that we can all find common ground. Because at the end of the day, we are really all the same. So, now we get to another point about intercultural communication, and that is the way in which you have been defined, how other people define you versus the way you define yourself. So I want to introduce to you two terms. One term is called ascription. When someone ascribes to you, they are basically telling you how you are to be defined. Someone says, they look at you and they say, you are this or that. You are, this is what you represent. This is what you mean to me, without giving you the opportunity to define yourself. Self-definition, as it were, is a concept in intercultural communication called avow. You say, I avow something. I tell you, this is who I am, a caring person, a scholar, a researcher, a family member, a sister, a friend, someone who is good and someone who loves meeting new people. I'm telling you what I am and who I am, rather than you telling me. So now we get to the first part of our interactive feature, whereby I would like for you, each of you, to just jot down, if you will, and do it on a separate sheet of paper, because what I would like to do at the end is to collect your answers, although I would like to take a few moments to discuss them as well. Give me, if you will, two ways in which people have ascribed to you a definition, a label, told you what you were, rather than allowing you to define those terms for yourself. Two ways, just two. There may be many, but we'll talk about two. And then, below that, write two ways in which you self-define, the way you define yourself. Who are you? That counter those narratives. Does that make sense to everyone? Two ways in which you have been ascribed to or labeled, ways in which people have ascribed labels, words, characteristics to you, and then two ways that you counter that with definitions of yourself. I'll give you a few moments to jot down your answers. Okay, have we written two things down? Do we have? Yes, okay. And continue to write. If you haven't finished, you have until the end of the presentation to think about this. So, two important questions, yes.
Okay, there is one description for me, that I'm a nerdy, lifeless girl,
Yes.
but I see myself as a girl with passion and commitment to her dreams. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Excellent, excellent. Someone else, yes.
People always tell me, how can you be a journalist even though you don't talk too much? I'm a shy person, but I can be a journalist, and I try to be a good journalist.
Yes, 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 excellent. And to that point, I'm a journalist as well, and when I was studying at Columbia University, they told us that journalists are, in many cases, shy by nature, and that we often use the profession of journalism where you must go and speak to people to sort of help to overcome that. So that's something that's very much resonant. So very good, very good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Ways in which you have been ascribed? Yes, someone here.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good trip yesterday with us. Okay. So people always say that we dislike you at the beginning. You look so serious and you gave us an expression to leave a space between you and us.
Yeah.
I say I know that, and I see myself as a serious person in reality, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So it's true. You don't like people telling you that's what it is. That you rather them get to know you first, and then for you to define yourself. Good, 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 good. Anyone else? Anyone else? One more before we move on. One other? Yes, in the back. Yes, yes.
يعرفون عني أحيانا أنا وسيم من دمشق من جماعتنا أو من نوفينا. هذا يعني أن وسيم ينتمي إلى الطائفة السنية التي هي طائفة مسلمة، لكنني أنا لا أحب هذا التعريف، وذلك أعرف عن نفسي بديلا بأنني أدرس العلوم السياسية والإعلام وأعمل كصحفي وأسكن في دمشق. صديقي الذي عرف عني كذلك يريد أن يقول أنه نفس دين أهله أو نفس دين المكان الذي يعيش فيه، لكنني قد يكون لدي ميول أخرى دينية أو طائفية.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Wasim is talking about the ways in which he has been described based on his ethnicity and his religious denomination, and how based only on his name and where he lives that he has been ascribed to. And again, this is a very disturbing process. We do it all of the time. We label one another rather than sort of getting into the process of getting to know one another, connecting with each other, and then allowing other people to tell us about themselves rather than telling other people about themselves. So thank you so much for all of your responses. Again, if you did not respond, I would like to take down all of your responses by collecting your papers at the end of this presentation, and then sort of maybe posting some of them on Facebook or something. It's just maybe your first name, so it's not private, so people don't know or have more personal information. Just another way to share your answers. But thank you all very much, very much. So moving closer into the discussion of the presentation, imagine if an entire nation or the world did this to you. Maybe in some of your experiences you feel that way. If you live in a society whereby you are ascribed to more than you have the opportunity to avow and tell other people about yourself, rather than allowing you to define yourself. This is the characteristic of many African American or Black women in the media in the United States. But despite what people have to say in the media about African American women or other, what we call women of color in the United States, the Black woman has what's called an illustrious history, a vast and wide history, a diverse history, a joyful history, and yes, in some cases, a painful history. And those themes were there with us when we came to the United States, and they are here with us today. We are, like any other people, complicated, dimensional people with multiple layers, multiple concerns, multiple facets. There is just no one way to see all of us. And what we are fighting for here is the opportunity to be known and to be seen as we truly are. And so, we came to the United States not free, suffered all manner of abuse, And we did not necessarily have the safety that we would be assured or that our lives would be considered or valued. And so, despite that, we moved from the process of enslavement. And once that was ended, we sought, as Black women and as part of our family and community, better opportunities for ourselves and for our children and for our futures. Then there was a turning point whereby suddenly we were free, and someone thought of it well to establish institutions of higher learning so that people who are newly free could receive education. And this goes back to another concept in organizational communication that I talk to my students about. I teach an introductory course called Introduction to Organizational Communication to graduate students, as I mentioned previously. And there are two ways of thinking about organizational communication. One way is what's called the conventional approach, or the informational view. And that view uses communication in the concept of communications contained within an organization. Now, many of us are part of organizations at our schools, in our families. Families are organizations, places of business that we patronize. And the conventional view looks at communication within an organization as the glass of water. The glass is the organization. The water is the communication within the glass. In other words, the communication contained within that organization. So emails, meetings, presentations, advertising, any kind of communication that comes in, employee manuals about how to engage in the process of work, those things are the organization, that's the communication within the organization. But a new constitutive approach, or a new approach to organizational communication, looks at communication used to establish organizations. And those communications, such as at the end of enslavement in the United States, people got together and decided to form institutions so that people may learn, so that people may have opportunity in life. That idea was discussed, and that form of communication led to the establishment of what's called historically Black colleges and universities. In the United States today, there are 105 such organizations. Today, they are actually diversified and no longer solely African American. Many people can come of all walks of life, and the faculty, as well as the student body, are now diversified. And so we have these institutions, and at the time that they were established, they were instrumental in helping African American women achieve education. And so, receiving education, African American women, they pressed on. They sought education at equal levels with men. But despite their high education attainment, they were still marginalized, cast to the side. And in reality, when you think about it, women were marginalized in American society and around the world. Opportunities were not forthcoming for women in general. And so, generations passed, women were seeking opportunity, taking advantage of what they could take advantage of, and moving through society in the way in which they could learn and grow and benefit their communities in the process. They worked in and out of the home. In spite of it all, they were facing racial segregation, economic deprivation, but again, they pushed through despite the odds. Brown versus Board of Education was a moment in the United States whereby segregation in schools were ended. There was a concept called separate but equal schools, and by virtue of the Supreme Court decision in the United States, schools were actually integrated, and African Americans could actually go to school with the majority population in our society. Of course, many of you have heard about the civil rights movement, which has served as a template for many rights movements around the world. And today, we are still fighting many of the same battles, despite how far we have come. African American women have excelled. They continue to excel and shine despite the many odds. They were largely overworked and overlooked. but they continue to do their share to participate in society, to build, again, as mentioned, their families and their societies. Another quote by Tina Turner, she really talks about here the fact that she didn't have anyone. There was no one to help her, to show her the way, to sort of explain the ways in which the world or society works. And she essentially had to find her own path. That is the same path that many people of color, many Black women in the United States and around the world have as their individual struggle. They have to make a way out of no way and find their own path. So, despite all of the many good things that they have done and the ways in which they have sought to achieve and to grow in society, we end up with a list of stereotypes, common stereotypes that are in the media about Black women today. So I want to show you a brief clip that sort of illustrates this concept. Sorry about the delay.
Chicken and watermelon.
Before I start, sort of an alert. There is some offensive language in this, and I don't mean to be offensive, just I thought that this would be illustrative of the point that I'm trying to make. So again, excuse any offensive language that you may hear.
Melon. They think that that's something wrong with me. Let me tell you something. If you don't like chicken or watermelon, something's wrong with you, motherfucker. There's something wrong with you.
Did you lower your voice?
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Can everyone hear?
Check to you wordplay. The hand and valet the keys to the Mercedes.
According to stereotypes, I am a Black woman, so that means I'm rude. I twist my neck when I speak because I have an attitude. I am loud and unapproachable. If you disrespect me, I become uncontrollable because my only method of communication is through volatile speech that escalates the situation. I'm skinny, so in the eyes of the media, I am just right. If I'm well-spoken, then I act white. My name is either Keisha, or something that rhymes with Isha. My father left when I was young, so apparently that means I have issues with men, and every insecurity of mine somehow goes back to then, as I'm a girl. So that means I have issues with other girls, but especially the ones that are pretty, because they threaten me. My hair is Afro-kinky, so that means it's messy, but if I wear weave, then I have issues with my identity, and God forbid that anyone should find out that my boyfriend's white. Because that just means I want my kids to be liked. I am all these things when you first see me, because stereotypes help you to classify me. But I was given a life to live it. So let me live it. Let me discover, breathe, and be it, because I am not the stereotypical cliche of whatever you imagine me to be. I see right through you, Mr. Media. Don't believe everything they're telling you. No one questions or thinks to mention that half the things we see on TV are just fabricated lies, a distorted version of the truth that we believe in because we trust in these power figures, we quote these power figures.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so there was another actual video that I wanted to show, but we're kind of running short on time, so I'll continue. A word about stereotypes is that some of them are in fact true, but not all of them are. Okay, so hang on one second. Oh. Some are true, because that's kind of the nature of stereotypes. But no one group is perfect. We all have our flaws, we all have our benefits and our accomplishments. But a word about stereotypes, and we'll get more into the research component of the presentation at this point, whereby I talk about previous research from other scholars and talk about the years in which they established the research and the major themes. But stereotypes is another name called by the Media Literacy Project as a tool producers use to create divisiveness in society. And according to other scholars, they work best in a non-homogenized society where people are of different races so that they can polarize and pit one group against the other or establish a racial and ethnic hierarchy in society. Again, there's a particular work that I found of a special relevance to this particular presentation, and that is Moody from 2012. In her particular research, she was speaking about stereotypes that have leaped from legacy media and have now been transferred into the digital age. So whereby we had legacy media in the past with television, radio, magazine, and newspapers, we now have online and digital communication. And Moody argues that those same stereotypes of African American women have moved into the digital arena today, just as they were in forms of legacy media. She talks about the ways in which people of color are often portrayed as members of the underclass, how particularly people of color or African Americans are described as either loud politicians and criminals. News programs feature them as drug addicted and criminals, where they have them shown as walking and being led to jail, or the mugshot of them after they're arrested. And these things were noted by the Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, which is a media watchdog group that reported that in addition to the stereotypes, that there is also underrepresentation of groups of color, particularly Black men and women, as experts, even though they do exist. Many people can come and speak about the various issues in society, but they are not granted that opportunity in news programming. Other groups and researchers also talk about the instances or the predomination of racialized stereotypes in the news, and the fact that journalists are predominantly white and that newsrooms are typically constructed of white individuals. Plenty of people of color work as journalists in the United States. However, there are many instances whereby there are white males who are in leadership and executive positions. The decision makers are not often people of color, and it is the decision makers who determine the coverage agenda, the decision makers who hold the purse strings and determine which stories to focus on and the frame of those news stories. And this is highlighted in the research of many, many scholars. Again, there is the intersection of media stereotypes, media literacy, and the concept of feminism. And Moody, in 2012, she goes on to talk about how media as part of the larger structure. And when we speak about the concept of structure, what we're talking about are the institutions that compose or comprise a society. So media is a part of a societal structure much in the way education is part of the structure, government is part of the structure, medical institutions, as well as economic, banking, and financial institutions all comprise, or the military comprise what we know in research and scholarship as a structure of society. And Moody argues, using the work of many people listed here, that essentially women in the media are represented in a typical format as passive, submissive, and dependent. That's women in general. And then there is the intersection of women and race, whereby African American women are sort of defined in a different way, which we'll get to in a moment. But Moody argues that these constructs of women in a society basically uphold the notion of patriarchy as well as capitalism in society. And that these stereotypes are then made to seem normalized in the current structural outlay of the media. One of the things in which African Americans experience as they are stereotyped in the media is that there is an either-or pattern that is found. Either they are considered oversexed or asexual, either they are considered unintelligent or extremely educated, ambitious or listless, meaning lazy, they don't like to work, or that they are either attractive or unattractive. And there's a concept called the Jezebel from, of course, the biblical term. Jezebel is sort of a disrespectful, rebellious kind of a woman, and then versus the mammy who's embracing everyone on her bosom, and she has comfort and love in feeding people food and making sure that they feel comfortable and accepted. So it's always this dichotomy, never any in-between or gray areas when talking about African American women. Also the welfare chief, the person who uses government assistance as opposed to going to get a job and working to support herself. Again, the concept of the stereotypes, there is what we call, there are key terms, and I'll just go through them pretty quickly. The angry black women, the use of the B word, that they're either controlling, aggressive, loud, rude, and pushy. The sapphire, which is sort of a take of the Jezebel figure, and then that they are shown often in the media as wisecracking or emasculating women, basically tearing down the masculinity of men and sort of challenging their authority and sort of discounting them. But media literacy can be and is considered a solution, at least from my perspective as a media scholar. Now, we all know that there are key definitions or key terms that sort of surround the concept or the construct of what's called media literacy. And just going over them quickly and then using the sourcing because many of them sort of overlap and then are different at the same time. Again, it's the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, produce, and create. And then finally, what I consider to be one of the primary components of media literacy is the ability to act upon what you learn about. It's one thing to learn about something, but I always like to talk to my students and say, what are you going to do about what you've learned? How will you make a difference? In what way will you make a difference? And put a pin in that thought because we will get to that again in another moment. I see people taking slides. Let me know if you're taking pictures and I advance too quickly, I can, and we'll go back. Citing the Salzburg Academy, the 5 A's of media literacy, again, awareness, access, advocacy, activism, and analysis of media literacy, 5 A's. And these A's, they seem pretty catchy, but they are very deep in the sense that they're something to help you as what we call in English sort of a mnemonic device, a way to help you understand and remember the concepts. So when you think about media literacy, you think about the 5 A's: awareness, access, advocacy, activism, and analysis. But they are actually complicated terms. I don't know if everyone can see this well. Access suggests that we look at areas of ownership with the media. Who owns the media? And then what are the barriers? In the United States, media is capital intensive. In other words, you need lots of money to engage or to start a media enterprise. At least you once did. We'll talk about that changing as well. And then there is the participatory element. Are you being discussed to and ascribed to and given information? Is it a one-way flow, or are you allowed to participate in the process? And then, of course, we are now in the digital arena, and that creates new realities and new challenges as we look at media as well. Then there is the concept of awareness, which looks at or asks you to think about the values that are discussed, the ideologies that are discussed, who is represented in the media that you are consuming, and what is the context of that media. Appreciation allows us to talk about the idea of expression. Whose ideas are expressed? Whose culture is represented? Whose perspective are we talking about? And is the media product diverse? And how do you define diversity? It is not just a concept of race and ethnicity, but class, education, geographical, economic diversity. The action component implores us to look at agency, that word we talked about last week, your ability to actually do something, to get involved, to make a change. Is there agency? Is it allowed for you to be, or is it permissive for you to be engaged? Is this a community-based or civic kind of media? And whose voice? Is your voice heard, represented, or is it someone else's voice? Can you identify that voice when you hear it? Then finally, the assessment component of the 5 A's of media literacy. Who or what is the audience that this particular media product has been produced for? What are the sources? Have they been confirmed? Are they valid sources? Are they accurate sources? And finally, what is the purpose of this particular media? These are the concepts that the 5 A's of media literacy ask you to think about and to consider. Again, just a smattering of information about media literacy, many of the definitions. This one comes from the National Association of Media Literacy Education in the United States, also known as NAMLE. And again, they have come up with the access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. And essentially they say, in its simplest terms, media literacy builds upon the foundation of traditional literacy and offers new forms of reading and writing. Media literacy empowers people to become critical thinkers and makers, effective communicators, and active, emphasis on active citizens. Again, critical media literacy, there's a concept called critical media literacy. A set of scholars talked about critical media literacy challenging the status quo and the powers. They say that looking at media as non-problematic and transparent, meaning everything is okay with the media as it is. They're not doing anything wrong. They may be doing good things, but there is still the imperative to consider challenging some of the things that we don't find acceptable in the outlay of media productions. Finally, they say that all media messages are influenced by the subjectivity and biases of those who create the message, as well as the social context within which the process occurs. So media is not happening in a vacuum. And just as we all have individual ideas, when we go to produce media, we are basically engaging in a process that has embedded bias. And it's just something that we all should be aware of when we consume media. Now, media literacy from my personal perspective, I learned about media literacy when teaching a course as part of a graduate program at James Madison University in the United States. I also incorporated the concept of media literacy in my dissertation. My dissertation, ironically, myself being a journalist, focused on the concept of news satisfaction levels among African Americans. Under the premise that the news contains so many stereotypes, I polled roughly 100 people. I was not as ambitious as I could have been, given it was my dissertation, and they said to me, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. And so I polled about 100 people using a convenient sample, emailing and using surveys online to ask what people thought about the news. And as it turns out, people were not satisfied with the news at all. And my advisor suggested that I incorporate the concept of media literacy. People know that they don't like some aspects of the media, but they may not be sure or clear about what to do about it. And that's when I started to become more interested in the concept of media literacy. So again, I began publishing on the topic, and I enrolled in a graduate certificate program where I'm still learning. One researcher, I think it's Potter, who said that there is no such thing as a media literacy pinnacle. No Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world, where I get to climb and say, now I'm media literate. Because media literacy is an ongoing process as media continues to change and evolve. Today, social media, new media, online, digital technology is all the rage. If we fast forward 20 years, will it be the same? As such, we will need to continue to strengthen our media literacy muscle and grow as media literacy consumers and media literacy scholars and educators. It's just imperative, and media producers as well. So I joined organizations like NAMLI, the National Association of Media Literacy Education, and then I'm also editing a volume coming up in 2018 about media literacy in higher education. And one of the things, as the editor of the volume, I will introduce all of the topics, and I have many chapters in the volume that talk about how to incorporate media literacy at the college and university level. But I also get the opportunity to talk about how media literacy, just like education, has a liberation component, that we are all educating ourselves because we understand that knowledge is power. And the more we know, the more empowered that we can become. So I'm sort of using both topics to sort of intersect the ways in which we can further empower ourselves through this important topic. But as mentioned, I'm still growing and learning, and I have a long way to go. And I also engaged in the process of learning about media literacy because I simply wanted to help people who were like myself and other people around the world to talk about the stories that were not covered. As a researcher and a scholar, I felt that this was important to talk about further, and I wanted to help other women like myself, as well as young girls who are coming up, who are impressionists, who are being impressed by some of these negative images, and to help them identify those who identify with these challenges. Okay, so I have one more video that I would like to show to you.
Little girls that love themselves become women that rule the world. I'm from Tulare, California, very small town. We're a farming community. I was born to a single mother who had me at 17 years old. My mom went to night school and then she went to junior college. So I was kind of bounced around through my aunts and my grandmother's, Aunt Sally, my grandmother, and my Aunt Lily. I'm a little black girl with almond-shaped eyes, full lips, brown skin. You know, my grandma made me feel like a superhero and my mom made me feel like a queen. As I was getting older, I was called Cookie because I hung out with a lot of white girls. And I didn't understand, I just knew that those were my white friends, so I was affected by that. And my journals were always like, I just want to fit in. I wasn't in your definition of what black girl was. I was definitely trying to find my black identity in a town where I didn't know.
The poor representation of black women throughout history has shaped the way society views them. It is not often that you see black women portrayed outside of negative stereotype. From mammies to video vixens, black women are rarely given the opportunity to be multidimensional. Black Girl Magic is the hashtag that empowers black women and defies stereotypes by recognizing their intelligence, creativity, and beauty. It's black women leading all groups across race and gender, from college enrollment to voter turnout. They are the fastest growing segment of business owners among women. From sports to politics and entertainment to science, black women are reclaiming their image.
You know, the world wasn't really nice to us visually. You know, we had to dig. We weren't represented well. I remember when I went natural, it was the first time I ever saw myself. This is how I really look. I started just to say I'm black and I'm beautiful, regardless of what you think of me. And if I love myself, you will love me too. Black girls, to me, needed a place to feel soft. They needed a place to see their reflection. You're just beautiful and you have emotions. I just wanted to paint that picture. And I decided, you know what, why don't I put everything that I have in my journals online? And I started basically telling a story. In hindsight, I can see that it was necessary. It was a necessary space, and I started to realize that more when I started getting letters. Your page feels like home to me. I can see myself. Thank you. I come to your page because it's hard to go to school in the morning. And I'm like, I remember those moments. I definitely remember those moments. The letters are healing for me every day. Every day. Black women out there doing their thing, being the best at what you do. I have a platform, and I think I have a purpose to share these things.
Okay, so as you can see, black women have had to take control of their own media image and help change the narrative, reshape the narrative. As was depicted in the clip, African American or black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the United States. They have the highest level of voter turnout of all races in the United States, and they exceed all other groups in college enrollment and have the highest level of college completion in the United States among individual groups. You may not Google, but DuckDuckGoose that. I like to joke about DuckDuckGoose may overtake Google one day, and instead of Gmail, we'll have Gmail, just as an aside. We are in every facet of society, prominently featured in many cases as educators, as people affiliated with the law, as attorneys, federal, state, and administrative judges. We own our own businesses. We represent in the sporting world many major sporting figures in the United States are not just African American men, but women as well. We are in medicine as doctors, nurses. We own our own practices as well as working in hospitals and serving the public. And we are in politics as mayors, members of Congress, state senators, and local politicians as city council members, as well as policymakers throughout the United States. In fact, the city which I come from or live in today has a black woman as the mayor. Her name is Muriel Bowser, and she is the mayor of the city of Washington, D.C. We think of the president, but the city actually has a mayor. She is not the first mayor of the city who is an African-American woman, and there are many other women who hold leadership in the political arena in the United States. Madam C.J. Walker is a figure. She is, I'm sorry, I'll go back. Thank you all were taking pictures of that. Madam C.J. Walker is the first African-American millionaire in the United States in the 1920s. And she said this, I think it's important to highlight her particular cause. She said, "I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub. From there, I was promoted to the cook kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and preparations." She concludes, "I have built my own factory on my own ground." In other words, she created her own opportunity for herself. Society was not recognizing her, not giving her the opportunity. She took control of her own destiny, and she created her own opportunity and became the first Black female millionaire in the United States in the 1920s. Okay, I'll wrap up quickly. Black women have, someone was taking pictures, sorry. Black women have had to inspire themselves when they could not get inspiration from anyone else. Maya Angelou talks about the concept of courage. She says, "Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. If you do not have courage, all else doesn't matter." And you think about it. And then there are Black women as trailblazers. Oprah so famously says that we should think like a queen. A queen is a person who is not afraid to fail. Failure, she says, is another stepping stone to greatness. Don't be afraid to fail. It helps you become who you are. This is the message that Black women had to say to themselves, to empower and encourage ourselves. And then finally, circling back to Moody from 2012, she says, "Consider the impact of digital media in this day and time, and its impact on race and gender, the discourse." She says this is a keen opportunity that we have today as students, producers, media scholars, and that we should learn to read critically, how to read media messages critically so that we can engage in new forms of media and become engaged and involved in the process of democracy. So basically she's talking about the concept of media literacy and the importance of the digital age and how it basically changes the dynamic, allows for people to have opportunity to participate in media where they have not previously been allowed to participate, and change the narrative. So I personally found it necessary, again, as mentioned, I've done a number of things, but I also work to change the narrative actively. I can't do it on my own. It's a group process. I'm not superwoman. I can do some things, my part. But the things that I've done with the knowledge that I have acquired over the years is through my teaching. I teach my students media literacy through the communication courses that I do teach. I also engage in research, as mentioned before. And then I also am in the process of producing what's called a local, hyper-local newscast. That newscast is, instead of regional, it sort of focuses on the neighborhood, the community, kind of civic in nature, civic community-based media. I will be producing that at the beginning of this coming year, 2018. And then also developing a news website for the community and collaborating with a local nonprofit radio station to talk about producing a local radio station In these ways, I can highlight the good that is happening in the community and highlight some of the stories that sort of fly under the radar and are not spoken about in what we call the dominant or mainstream media in the United States. Changing the narrative. Think about that more deliberately. And as we conclude, I have one final exercise for you to think about. How will you work to change the narrative using media literacy and incorporating the important information you learned at MDLAB 2017 and in other areas of your educational experiences? What you've learned about media literacy and you've taken it in, what will you do to engage in and to act upon the media messages that you have learned? Jot down, if you will, some responses or a response. And if you have or know of ways offhand that I have not mentioned or that add to what we've discussed, then please, by all means, I can take your questions and ideas now, just as a way of sharing with people in the audience, if you will. Anyone. Or you can take a few moments if you will. We have, I think, a few minutes. Ways in which you will work to change the media literacy or to change the narrative if you experience stereotypes or if you think that there are aspects or components about media that need to be changed. How will you work to change the narrative?
شكرا جزيلا. جنابك ركزت على فقط الجانب الامريكي، يعني المراه السوداء، المراه السوداء في الجانب يعني في الولايات المتحده الامريكيه، وانه نظره يعني غير صحيحه، ولكن موجوده في العالم ككل خصوصا العالم العربي هناك نظره يعني عفوا يعني نظره يعني غير صحيحه للمراه، لم تركز على هذا الجانب. شكرا.
Yes. Excellent point. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, all of the themes. And I meant to kind of incorporate that and embed that more effectively, that the themes that I'm discussing and talked about in the presentation are applicable. I'm speaking about it from my experience because I can best speak about my experience. And I was given the opportunity to share with you today because there are resonant themes that apply to many cultures, many media systems around the world. And so, absolutely, to your point, that yes, while I was focusing mostly on African American women, there are replicable and applicable themes to this concept that can be shared in many cultures, in many societies. Many people are experiencing, and it's not just women. I talked about women, but it's not just, I don't necessarily mean to exclude people who are not women. It's applicable to everyone. This is a message that resonates, especially about empowering and acting upon media messages. And so I want to make that clear. I hope everyone was able to sort of get some kind of value from the presentation either way. Any ideas about how else you will work to change the narrative, your own narratives or narratives that you experience in the media?
شكرا جزيلا للمحاضرة القيمة. تحدثت عن المجتمع السود في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. كيف تواجهون أو ما هي الصعوبة الموجودة عندما نرى في الأفلام الهوليودية أن السود هم أحيانا هم اللي يمثلون هذه الشخصيات أو يكتبون أو يخرجون. كيف تواجهون الصعوبة هنا؟ أحيانا من أجل المال أو من أجل الفكاهة أو من أجل نشر الأفلام. كيف تواجهون هذه الصعوبة وأنتم يعني تواجهون هذه المشكلة؟
Good question. How does the African American community sort of work to overcome the many stereotypes in Hollywood and in the media in general? One is by becoming media producers ourselves and trying to, what they call proverbially, getting to the table to be able to speak to the people who are creating these messages. What we find is that there are the people who are rewarded with, let's say, contracts or movie scripts that get expressed into production in the United States sort of speak to the narrative, that dominating stereotypical narrative that reinforces the larger society's opinion about African Americans. Some movies get through, like Hidden Figures, where the one particular, Ms. Johnson, was responsible for helping the United States get to space based on her mathematical ability. That's an occasional story that gets through. In most cases, it's stereotypical, and it's a constant process. The numbers are increasing, whereby we're getting involved in Hollywood, directing, being part of the African-American cinema projects and things of that nature, but it's an ongoing process. But I thank you, yes, indeed, yes, yes.
بداية شكرا على الطرح القيم. أتوقع من الكلام اللي تكلمتي فيه كان كله بيتحدث عن تغيير النمطية نحو المرأة، فبتوقع من جانب التربية الإعلامية المفروض أن نغير تحديد المرأة بالبيولوجيا أو نظرتها للجسد أو تكوينها البيولوجي انتقالا لأدوارها الوظيفية والثقافية. فبتوقع هذا الحل اللي ممكن نتجاوز فيه من جانب إعلامي. الأمر الآخر أنه ندعو للمساواة والعدالة بعيدا عن التماثل، إلا إذا كان في وجهة نظر أخرى من تعليقا منك يعني على موضوع التماثل والدعوة للمساواة والعدالة بعيدا عن التماثل. شكرا.
Yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. Thank you so much. Focusing more on the similarities and the ways in which we can work together in the community, not just the mere biological function of women different than men completely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes.
شكرا جزيلا. أنا أدرس طلابي في اليمن وأعلمهم حين يذهبون لتغطيات إعلامية أو تناول قضايا المجتمع فإن عليهم أن ينتصروا للقيم وللمبادئ والمثل التي تتجاوز الانتماءات الجغرافية أو الطائفية أو حتى الدينية أو حتى على أساس النوع الاجتماعي. فالأساس في هذا هو حق الإنسان بشكل عام بشكل مجرد. الحق هو الحق والانتهاك هو الانتهاك بغض النظر عمن هو المنتهك وما هي ديانته. لأن لدينا في اليمن لدينا مسلمين ولدينا يهود ولدينا أيضا الآن يعني عملوا على توسيع الشرخ فيما بين مكونات المجتمع وظهرت لدينا الطائفية الدينية. فأركز دائما مع طلابي أننا يجب أن نبحث الانتهاك بغض النظر عن من هو المنتهك ومن هو المنتهك في حقه أو الذي تعرض لهذا الانتهاك. فهذه الأشياء التي أركز عليها دائما. وحتى أيضا فيما يتعلق بالمرأة نحرص دائما على أن نقول أن المرأة يجب أن تكون ممثلة في كل مجال من مجالات الحياة بوصفها إنسانا بغض النظر عن كونها ذكر أو أنثى. يجب أن تتقدم الصفوف ويجب أن تشارك بوصفها إنسان لا غير.
Thank you very much. Very well said. I'd like to also dovetail off of your comment to say that justice denied for anyone around the world is justice denied to all of us. And so oftentimes we tend to be insular and focus on our own struggles and the things in which are oppressing us individually without thinking about the commonalities of oppression and negative imagery. And one way we can understand that is by looking at and empathizing with other people in other cultures. People in the United States have the sense of, oh, it's just us, we're only the ones who are being oppressed. Not at all. It's around the world in every community. There's someone whose rights are being violated, and it is our imperative to sort of consider that. So thank you very much.
ممكن أنا أكون قبلك؟ أوكي. أول شيء شكرا على المحاضرة. ثاني شيء التجربة الأمريكية تختلف تماما عن التجربة العربية للمرأة. أنا مستفزة صراحة لأنه عمالي بحس الحكي مثالي زيادة عن اللزوم، وإذا أجينا نقرأ الواقع بنشوف أشياء مختلفة تماماً. وإذا بدي أحكي عن الواقع الفلسطيني اللي أنا عايشة فيه متواجدة فيه بشوف إنه هذا الحكي علشان أنا أغير الخطاب الإعلامي لما نتحدث عن المرأة بحاجة لجهود مش بس على المستوى الفردي. إذا أنا ككرمل بدي أرجع على البلد أعطي طلابي على سبيل المثال أو الناس أو حتى بالأشياء اللي أنا بعملها أشياء أنا بآمن فيها شو نسبة اللي راح يقتنعوا بكلامي. فعلشان هيك بشوف إنه في تقصير من كل الجهات على مستوى الحكومة من الجانب السياسي، المؤسسات الاجتماعية اللي من المفروض إنها تكون بتعمل على تمكين المرأة هي ورا الكواليس. وهذا الإشي أنا يعني انتبهت عليه ولاحظته من خلال ورشات العمل اللي كنت أشارك فيها، إنه هي ورا الكواليس شيء آخر. نقطة ثانية، إذا انتبهتوا بآخر كم شهر كان في مشكلة للفتيات السود ببريطانيا علشان شعرهم. فكان في مشكلة إنهم يدخلوهم على مدارس، بعض المدارس في بريطانيا بسبب الشكل اللي شعرهم هو طبيعته هيك. وكمان شغلة، في فيلم دوكيومنتري اسمه ميكس تيب بيحكي عن الثورة الأمريكية للسود في أمريكا، فكنت بتمنى لو اتليست ينعرض جزء منه. شكرا.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to address her comment. Very much I appreciate and resonate with what you're saying. It is very difficult to change systems and society. Me coming here and speaking and giving this presentation does not mean that you can go back and just challenge the government and say, make a change. It's very difficult. It is an ongoing process. It happens one person, one idea at a time, and the movement will swell. Remember that for African American women, we had to fight for everything. No one gave anything. There was not oh, now we'll be kind to black women. Just as you mentioned about the women in Palestine and the women in the UK with their hair, it's the same. We had the same struggle where they said to a group of women in Philadelphia and in New York and urban corporate America, they couldn't come with the braids because the braids were considered dirty and they were not clean. And there was a fight and a lawsuit to where they had to actually earn the right to wear their hair in the natural form to come to work. So always those things, we can find strength and power from one another, and you're not alone in that struggle. Again, the Palestinian struggle is very similar to the struggle of African Americans in the United States, whereby there is an occupation in our communities, where there is harassment by the police, unfair and improper imprisonment that happens in our communities as well. And so this conference seeks to sort of bridge those same gaps where we think we are alone in our oppression. In fact, we are not. We're the same. So we can build the bridges of opportunity, and so we can find strength and encouragement. Mara had a question. Mara, right here in the back. And I think one more question after her, and then we have to. Yes.
Actually, I agree with Carmen, and I was going to mention the same comment. But I agree that we have strong black women, and the biggest example is Michelle Obama, who is indeed very stronger than Obama himself. Yes, and she was more powerful than him.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Thank you, thank you.
May I make my comment first?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It's really striking and maybe shocking to hear about the issue of black people in the United States after these years of struggling for the rights of black people in the United States. And I think black people achieved a lot of things. And we thought in our world that equality is there, and there are no problems. Now, I have actually two questions. The first question is, it would be better if you make a comparison about the image of white women and black women, because it might be the same image. I'm not sure. That needs to be researched, maybe quantitatively. The second question, we need, I think, to work more on linking your lecture to our problems in our countries. All the lecture, during the lecture, I was thinking, how can I take this research and solve our problems? Because you mentioned two problems, not only black people, but black and women. and that's dual issue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. Any of people who are interested in researching and bridging, making those connections, please, I'm definitely happy to do so, to research, because this is how we expand this topic and help one another to understand and inspire each other. So I'm definitely receptive as a researcher to bridge the gap and to
if I could make a comment, in my trip to the African American Museum, after we saw the stories of how the African were just taken there and so on, I started crying because it was like so touching and so on, like how a man would have to buy his wife and children, so they set them free. And then the people there started telling me, it's okay, they are better now. And I looked, and I cried more. I told them, no, they're not better because like it's discrimination in another type. So the problem maybe is not so totally, but just in another way.
Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayne, for a very interesting presentation. I also attended recently a presentation about African American radio history and the progression, the struggle that it took there. So I can see a lot of similarities between the African American communities and what's happening in the world concerning Arabs and Muslims and all of that. Now, in the money-making media machine, they feed on those stereotypes, whether it's African Americans, whether it's women, whatever it is. So how do we challenge that? And here I have to recall the Disney movie of Fiona, the first African American princess, and how I think not quite so positively received even by the American communities. So how do you reflect on that?
Yes, that's a good question. Of course, we've talked a number of times about the concept of media as a business, not just in the United States, but around the world. And that business essentially drives profits and ratings are predicated on the amount of people who watch or consume a particular media production. And one way that we would counter, and thank you so much for your question, very, very timely. One way to counter is to remember that the relationship between media producers and the media audience and the advertisers, it is a three-way relationship. This is part of one of the imperatives of media literacy that require us to act upon that relationship. We have been passive as media consumers over the years. We sort of allow a one-way flow of media to come to us. Even with social media, though it is interactive, the interface is owned and set up and structured to benefit financially itself and the advertisers. You, the media user, the audience, the end user, are sort of a parenthetical part of that process. You are not considered central. In order to be central, you must raise your hand and speak. You must challenge the status quo. Doesn't necessarily have to be a harsh challenge, but more or less allowing yourself to be recognized and to speak your piece about the content that you are receiving and consuming. This is an imperative. Otherwise, these kinds of images will continue. If you vote and say, I don't like something and I'm going to walk away or not consume it, then the advertisers don't make money. If it's a business model, the one way you protest is to cut off the financial flow of that process. It seems difficult, but it's really not that hard. If you watch a program and you find that people from your culture, your community, your group is being misrepresented, you have the right and the duty to write the producers and to voice your opinion. They can either change the narrative in the next thing, make a correction. This is your duty as a media audience member. You have that right, and that's one way. It seems easier said than done, and of course, yes it is. On the other hand, things will never change. Business, capitalism, and money sort of override our concerns, override our feelings, and our sense of belongingness because of the capitalistic imperative. And we must stop the narrative and say, I'm important. I want to be heard. I matter. And what you've said about me is offensive in this way. Responsible producers will respond and accept and hear your comments and make changes. Others will not, and in that sense, then maybe a boycott or some kind of campaign against them. And of course, this is involved in the age of social media. That has become much easier to engage in. And so we all have the power and the ability to engage with media producers in that way to help make the changes that need to be made. Yes, and more.
We have the last 3 questions.
Yes.
1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Sure.
اوكي يعطيكم العافيه جميعا، صباح الخير للجميع. بدي اسال سؤال عن مش المراه، عن الفئه المضطهده بالولايات المتحده اللي هم الفئه السود. حابه اسال شو الشيء اللي تغير بعد حكم اوباما والفتره اللي صارت بعد بين اوباما وبين ترامب. وخاصة إنه إعلامياً كان في يعني الإعلام تدخل كثير في الحملات الانتخابية للجهتين. وشكراً. أرجع أعيد؟ أوكي. سؤالي هو إنه الفئة المضطهدة اللي هم السود، شو الشيء اللي تغير؟ اوكي بقدر اخلي حدا ثاني يسال وارجع انا اسال لبين ما يزبطوا الترانسليشن. سؤال سريع، ايش اللي تغير بين حكم اوباما وترامب للسود، وكيف كان الاعلام يلعب دور كبير بالنسبه لصوره السود خاصه يعني بالمجتمعات الثانيه غير المجتمع الامريكي؟ شكرا.
Okay, that's a good question. How did, and thank you, how did, take them at the same time, okay.
I don't have a question. Just wanted to thank you, Jayne, for your training presentation. I think that all of us are now very excited to discuss more. I just wanted to say that while I was thinking how we can change and challenge these stereotypes in our societies, because I could say that I also come from a society where sometimes women are portrayed like just not the victims, but those ones who are weak, and the men are those who have always the questions, always the answers, and the power. So I was thinking that we have to educate our men differently. And I recall a story from my school years. I have a very good friend, and she lost her father at a very young age. And she was always the stronger one. She repaired the fridge at home by her own. But that was always also the reason why some boys from our class were like making jokes of her, who you are to repair your fridge on your own. Are you really that strong? And maybe the fridge sucks after all because you cannot repair it. And once we went in our literature class, and our teacher was a male, and he kind of overheard the jokes they were talking about her. And then he made all of the boys who made those jokes stand up. And then he asked them one by one, can you repair a fridge on your own at home? And all of the answers were no. And then he said, okay, then shut up till you can. And I think that from now on, there were no jokes about her repairing the things on her own at home. So I think that I'm really proud that I have such friends. I'm really proud that I met so many strong women here. I'm so proud that there were women like you, women like you, Jayne, who are so motivated, who are so brave to stand here and to talk about feminism. Because nowadays when you say I'm a feminist, or I really want to advocate for the rights of the women, the things that we get from the men are, okay, you're not the only one, but what are you talking about? So keep being empowered and belief in your cause. I think that the change is coming, and the change will come.
Thank you.
I want to talk about being here. Being a woman and a mother.
Yes.
I guess there is a conflict between our rights and the nature of being a mother.
Yes.
We are under pressure.
Yes.
Men always say that, oh, I'm helping you. Yes. But it's not that you are helping, it's your duty to do some tasks.
Yes.
This is a big problem here and maybe in other countries.
Yes.
Another issue that being a mother and a working at the same time makes us sometimes feel guilty.
Yes.
We have to here is the importance of media literacy.
Yes.
They always picture women working, but they don't picture the other side of how to be able to work, how to be able to be a good mother, what are the pressures, what can men do.
Yes.
I guess this is very important.
Yes.
As a mother, I always try to integrate my son. Today, let's say I tell him that I wrote an article about you, or about us, about our relationship, about how we play together.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I think that there's one more. Do we have time? That's it. Okay, so 3. I will address the the 3 questions. And again, anyone who would like to speak with me after, please feel free. The first question was about the era of communication during the President Obama's presidency and then after. Has there been a change? I would say the change has occurred in perhaps news coverage, not necessarily in entertainment, although some of the themes before the end of the the Obama presidency began to change around the last year during November after the election. There was a large coverage in some of the entertainment shows about the election and President Trump and kind of talking about that. News coverage has probably now become, I would suggest, a little more racialized in the sense that there is more coverage of some of the backlash of some of the policies of current President Trump, which have been, in some cases, detrimental to communities of color, not just the African American community. There's a lot of backlash against immigrants. Of course, you know, the Islamic ban, some of the countries that have been banned. And so now, news has taken on a much more racialized tone, I would suggest, during the last few months, 8 months of his presidency. Yes, indeed. So that's a good question. The next question, excuse me, deals with the idea of understanding from males, understanding the struggle that women encounter and helping them to understand some of the things that we are undertaking in our society. And that is an apt discussion because, again, it's not acceptable for stereotypes and for misunderstanding. And even though we evoke the feminist theory and feminist nature, in reality, we are all better when we work together collaboratively. We cannot win without one another. Women cannot win without men, and men cannot win without women. And so establishing the concept and the construct that we need one another and that we are better if we work together to understand that. And to the last comment about being a working mother, in the United States, we have in the field of sociology what's called the concept or the idea about the second shift. Women go to work during the day and they come home and work in the evening, cooking, cleaning, preparing, helping with homework, and sometimes with little help. Again, what I talked about in my presentation earlier is the normalization of stereotypes and negative imagery based on capitalism and male patriarchy. And so again, it is incumbent upon women to gently sort of urge the issue along and to talk about it with our partners, our spouses, and indicate that perhaps We need more help, we need more assistance, and make it okay. Again, this is where we are encumbered to challenge the dominant narrative and change the ways in which women are represented in the media as predominantly in the house and not outside in the working world. In the United States, most women economically need to work, so that narrative must change. So very good answers. Again, thank you to all of you for your participation and feedback. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I have business cards if you would like to contact me later or talk with me. Yes.
شكرا لك. تحدثتي عن تجربة.
I'm really sorry ما قصدي أقطعك بس مضطرين نحن نخلص
صرت داعس أكمل.
اوكي بس لأن في عنا حلقة نقاش بنحضر لها على المسرح
اوكي
مضطرين نوقف هون. بعتذر ما قصدي وقتك. اوكي اي حدا عنده سؤال جين معكم بالاوتيل.